I'd love to talk about concept creep, how definitions have changed and shifted over time to encompass things that are not bigotry or racism or Nazism. And Brian Holiday and I were talking about this a while ago, and I can't remember the exact example, but it was like, these people are Nazis. And I said, like, what do you think when people say that? And he goes, I don't like it, because then what word do you use for actual Nazis?
Boy, you cry wolf. You know, like if you're a Nazi, your best friend is that suddenly everyone's a Nazi. You blend right in.
Right.
And yeah, I think that, I mean, racism is the ultimate example right now. I mean, that word has no meaning anymore. I mean, it has very specific meaning to different groups, but it just crept and it's been you know, so I grew up in a progressive suburb, and the worst thing you could possibly be called was racist, more than a murderer or anything. I mean, it was like if you were called a racist, like it was like the most damning possible thing. And racism was like the worst thing. So then that word has a lot of power. It carries a ton of power. Again, you know, the weight, the gravity that word carried as a child. And then what happens is, you know, whether it's, you know, a kind of a radical ideology uses the word to mean something very specific, but it's a different thing. You know, it means, you know, in kind of woke ideology, racism is unequal outcomes, is a racist system because it's producing unequal outcomes. It's not about individuals. It's a systemic thing, like it's in the water and it's producing bad things, which is a totally fair concept. Like, I'm sure in a society with norms and history, there's all kinds of subconscious things going on, and there's systems, and there's historical things that go on that produce, you know, that hurt certain groups and help certain groups. So that's fair. But to use the word racism for it specifically, to me, that's a little bit sneaky, because it's saying we want people to take this thing so seriously, what we're saying, and to make it so taboo to not agree with us about this, that we're going to use the most powerful word in the American English language, the most powerful taboo. And basically, if you don't fix this system, you know, if you're upholding the system or participating in it, you are racist. If you disagree with these things, it's because of your racism. What it does is it cheapens the word. It takes that power, that gravity, and for a while, that gravity's still there, but it's being applied to lesser and lesser things. So it has a lot of, it's like you're taking it's throwing like a heavy ball and it's knocking people over and it's working, and it's really, you can use it as a weapon. But when you use it so much as a weapon and abuse it, what happens is the ball gets lighter and it carries less power, and getting called a racist doesn't mean that much, because, you know, we saw that guy over there get called a racist last week for saying, you know, something that basically would have agreed, Martin Luther King would have agreed with it, you know, and this person's saying this, and they're saying that, you know, that Hispanic people who voted for Trump are actually, you know, white supremacy adjacent. So now white supremacy is losing its meaning. There are white supremacists, and there is a white supremacy mindset in parts of the country, and it's dangerous and bad. And that, who knows where that is anymore, because it's been used on anything. If you are, you know, the flag itself is a symbol of white supremacy, so it doesn't mean anything, right? So that's a classic recent example. There's a million examples like this. Trauma, you know, PTSD, people saying, you know, in trauma, I was traumatized from this. And, you know, that teaches people to actually feel more traumatized by small things that happen to them, because you're using this. Trauma is an extreme, you know, PTSD was, you know, a term that came up after World War I, you know, with like shell shock and like people who saw their friend's head blown off. I mean, it's a really intense concept. And to use that because, you were groped at a frat once, you know, it's like, that sucks and that's bad. But to tell that person, no, you were traumatized by that, they're going to start to feel trauma. They're going to feel troubled. They're going to, you know, so it's not that to invalidate these things. It's that when you go to the most extreme word, Nazi, you know, racist, white supremacist, traumatized, violence. You know, this is an actual thing. You know, that disagreeing with someone is invalidating their identity. It's violence against them. It's erasing them. These really intense concepts for simple disagreement. So It is Boy Who Cried Wolf. It totally is the best friend of actual white supremacists and Nazis and things like that. And violence, actual violence now seems like it blends in because there's violence everywhere, apparently.
And words can be violence now, according to, depending on who you're asking.
Absolutely fascist, right? But that's, I'm giving all these examples on the left. There's a million of these examples on the right too, Trump called the election, the insurrection. He said the insurrection, the January 6th was the protest. He's calling what has very little evidence for any foul play. And I really looked into it. I was open-minded. I was like, let me look at all of his claims. And every one of his claims, it's like, nope, because you said that there's more votes here than there was, but that was the state vote, not the county vote. That was just using the wrong number. There's everything like this, just full bullshit, these things. And to call that, an insurrection, it's one of the most intense words in American political, language you could use as an insurrection. So, and of course, you've got, there's a lot of very complicated things going on with trans movements, and the normalization of transgender, and then whether, treatment should apply to kids. It's complicated, super messy, complicated issues. But on the right, you're going to hear, that anyone who's making an argument that doesn't fit with kind of the right-wing view is going to be a groomer. And on the left, anyone who doesn't make an argument that doesn't agree with there is going to be a transphobe. And so groomer is a nasty thing to be called. I mean, who wants to be a groomer? It's essentially being a pedophile in a way. It's not quite, but it's really close to that.
It's
where
like
you are
pre-pedophile.
Yeah, it has a sexual undertone, and even if it's just political grooming, you are abusing children. And transphobe on the left is, again, it's in that category of those words: homophobia, racist, white supremacist, misogynist. These words that signify you are an awful, abusive person, and it has a lot of history in the U.S. When you're a phobe, and you're a racist, these in the U.S. the history of that means we grew up being trained on those are the worst kind of people. So, this is concept creep. It's the idea that now it's not all. By the way, it's not all like I don't think these groups are necessarily all consciously being like, haha, we're going to use this word and that's going to, no, it's not. That's what happens is some of the science behind this. Nick Haslam is I think who wrote the original paper on concept creep, coined the term. I think he coined the term. He talks about how it's a natural thing that happens when times get better. It's almost like in our heads, we want to keep our level of, kind of our perception of how bad things are and the threats. We want to almost like we have this instinct to keep it constant. So when times get better, in order to keep that constant, you have to change something else. You have to so what I'm trying to say here is,
so like the threat goes down, but the vigilance has to stay the same. So you basically create another threat to fill the hole.
Yes. You don't want to, I think there's always an urge to have activism of different kinds or an urge to, fearmonger. But also I think that genuinely people think that if you get complacent, you start saying, hey, things are better, there's less racism, then your people are going to stop trying to fix the things that do remain, which there are, of course, always are. So concept creep is a way to, when, even just like poverty, when oppression, when these words, when there's for sure less oppression than there was 60 years ago in the Jim Crow South.
Right, yeah. Okay.
And there's definitely less poverty, right? And all these things, abuse, whatever, these things. So what you do is you inherently, you naturally kind of, if you're especially a progressive movement is trying to solve, trying to mitigate injustice, you're going to take these words of injustice and expand their definition vertically to lesser offenses and horizontally to different kinds of offenses. So like I said, racism could now apply to expand it horizontally. You start saying it's not just a person who has prejudice against someone of a different race. It actually is a system that produces unequal outcomes. That's expanding the definition horizontally, but also you could expand it vertically to say not just is it, again, prejudice, but actually colorblind, saying that, you believe that you should be colorblind. Like
microaggressions is the thing that comes up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and even that, what counts as a microaggression gets lesser and lesser. Saying, saying this is one of the classic examples that people say is a microaggression is saying this is the land of opportunity. Because it implies that, there's equality of opportunity, whatever. Saying that, there's only one race, the human race, which is what I grew up hearing. That's what a good person is supposed to say, which is that
Jesse Jackson said that or something like that.
That is now considered a microaggression. And so so that there's kind of two dimensions of concept creep, and what it does is it can have a good. The good can be that you now pay attention to more nuanced things. There, microaggression, again, it is a real concept where, the classic example is, I don't know, saying to, I don't know, just making a stereotype about a black person, an Asian person, or even a white person. Like it's ugly. It's rude, and it also is just it diminishes the individuality of that person, right? So, okay, we don't have maybe the Jim Crow South going on, but now let's pay attention to some of these more subtle things that are baked into the norms, subtle ways that people judge, implicit bias type stuff. Okay, good. Let's actually do that. But of course, I think that the negative outweighs the positive.
It just seems like the definition can expand infinitely. And that's the problem. I think Sam Harris, again, this is all fresh in my head. He brought up an example of, he had said, I may get this wrong. He had said that this African American woman's hair was really awesome, because I guess it was just like really, I don't know. I actually don't know. I think there was a lot of it, and it was like very unique. And he said that, or somebody said that, and she was like, that's a microaggression. But it was just like, shit, man, it was just a compliment. But it turned out to be something that made her feel othered, or whatever the rationale was. And it's a little scary that you can get that far when the intention of something was actually good.
No, and I think, like, if there is baggage there, historical baggage for a reason that would make her feel that way, well, I think the appropriate thing, or the productive thing, is for her to say, I know you meant well, but let me just tell you about why this rings badly for me, and probably for other people too. That's like totally reasonable, right? But the term microaggression right there, that it implies that he, it's this idea that it's not intent. Intent doesn't matter. It's impact, right? That's another tenet here, which is like, the impact you made is bad. It doesn't matter if you meant to do it or not. You're bad. You did something bad. As opposed to being like, no, your intention was good, and that's all that matters. Not, your impact still matters, but like from your point of view, like, or for how I view you, it's you intended well, right? So I think that, again, the concept of microaggressions and the way people talk about it is not productive. It's that in some ways this guy should be punished for, and this guy is, But also, I think that framing things that way trains someone like her to feel more aggrieved by that than she would have otherwise. And again, I give the example of like a woman who's groped at a college party, right? That's bad, right? It's terrible. It's terrible. But there's degrees, right? It's like, so of course, on the spectrum of degrees, there's someone who gets like, attacked in a dark alley and raped, all the way to someone who, they're on a date and the person leans in to kiss them and they didn't want to and they turn their head, right? So there's a spectrum here of like, right? And the point is that that's somewhere on the spectrum. It's not rape, it's nowhere near it, but it's also pretty bad. And it's like, it's violating, and it's incredibly disrespectful and whatever. But I think what's happening is that the mindset here encourages a college woman to feel to feel like something farther down the spectrum happened than she would have otherwise. So she might feel that it was a 6 out of 10 bad, or a 5 out of 10, and that would have caused her a 5 or 6 out of 10 anguish and frustration and whatever, and then she would recover 5 or 6 out of 10 amount of time later. And it's training her that that's an 8 or 9 out of 10. That's actually a trauma. There was a traumatizing assault. And the kind of the irony, Helen Pluckrose, is a second wave feminist who points this out, that like what the implicit thing here is this kind of this almost soft bigotry of being like, women are weak is the tone here, because if you're saying that you are traumatized by this, like traumatized, like you might never be the same, that's implying that she's a very fragile person, as opposed to saying, women are fully strong people, and like, to traumatize this person, you need to do a lot worse. Again, so this is obviously
it's a tough example, man. Two dudes talking about sexual assault.
Of course.
Like,
No. Yes.
Right
yes. I know.
Yikes.
But you know what? Like, we partly get into this mess is because these topics have such landmines on them. And I think it's like, to me, it's like we should be able to talk about this, and I would love people to tell me in thorough ways what I'm missing, and like we should, I don't know.
I'm gonna get those emails instead.
Well, honestly,
I'll forward them to you.
Yeah, and feel free to cut this part. Like I don't want. Is this your show
No,
too?
no, I'm not gonna cut it.
But like, yes. I think that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy with the victimhood mindset, and you encourage that, and it actually makes it creates more pain from there. Yes.